Welcome back. As you can see, we're still in the Arboretum of WCLG at those studios, and we're celebrating Earth Day in the Arboretum. And that's a reminder for you to all go out and do something to save the planet today and tomorrow and next week and next month, etc. Anyway, today we're going to talk about more about limited liability entities. Now, our main focus today is going to be limited liability companies, but I want to make a mention of what's called an LLP. That's a limited liability partnership. A lot of states, there are all sorts of things that can be LLPs, but in California, LLPs are restricted to people with professional licenses. The LLP can be a bunch of lawyers or a bunch of doctors or a bunch of architects or a bunch of accountants. And the reason for a limited liability partnership is that the members of an LLP are not liable for their partner's malpractice. They're liable for their own malpractice, but not their partners. And so many law firms and other kinds of professional firms you will see will be an LLP, and that's the reason why, so that they're not liable for their partner's malpractice and they're only liable for their own. But today the main focus is going to be on a limited liability company. Now, limited liability companies have only been around for about 40 years. They were set up, I believe they started in Wyoming, and they're set up as a hybrid between a corporation with the limited liability and the tax advantages of a partnership. Now, we don't have time to go into the tax advantages of partnerships or corporations, but there are some advantages for partnerships in taxes. So the combination of tax advantages of partnerships and limited liability of corporations makes what's called an LLC, or a limited liability company. Now, each state has its own LLC laws. There are very few similarities between them, and when you want to talk about an LLC in a particular state, you've got to go look at the law of that particular state. We're going to talk about California LLCs, of course, today, and that's essentially all we're going to talk about. And for one reason is that's all I know, since I'm a California lawyer. Now, owners of an LLC are called members. Owners of partnerships and limited partnerships are called partners. Owners of corporations are called shareholders, but owners of LLCs are called members. And those members have limited liability. All they can lose is the amount that they have already invested in the LLC. Once that goes down the tubes, they're no longer personally responsible for any debts or other obligations. How do you form an LLC? First, pretty simple. You file articles of organization with the California Secretary of State. Now, I've asked you as part of your homework to go to the Secretary of State's website, which is sos.ca.gov, and pull up articles of organization for an LLC. That's form LLC 1. Fill those out. And actually, I want you to fill them out. You can use real information or make up information. I don't care. Actually, I kind of like the way some of you guys do very, very clever and creative kinds of business organizations. Next, you set up what's called an operating agreement. Actually, first, articles of organization. File with the Secretary of State. 2 is operating agreement. Operating agreement is where you set up the rules for operating the LLC. And LLCs are incredibly flexible. You can have all sorts of different kinds of provisions in the operating agreement. For example, your organization, your LLC, can be member managed. That is, all of the members manage the LLCs, and every time you have a discussion, you vote. Whoever wins, wins. Or if there's only one or two, maybe like you and your spouse, then you just sit there and decide. Another thing, you can be manager managed. That is that the members elect a manager or several managers to run the LLC. They can be, they can give them names like president and vice president, or you can just be managers. That's all you need to make them. Now, one of the things that we know is that LLCs have lots of different advantages. One advantage is they're flexible. They can have various types of provisions. For example, in a corporation, you need to have an annual meeting. An LLC can do away with the annual meeting. LLCs are flexible in taxes. You can have all sorts of different taxation provisions. You can be taxed as a corporation, as a partnership, or as a sole proprietor, essentially depending on how many members that you have. Another thing is you can be flexible in management. For example, as I just mentioned, you can have management meetings once a year, once a month, once a quarter, or never. You just don't have to have management meetings. That's a bit of flexibility that an LLC can have. The other kind of flexibility that's often very important is flexibility in profit sharing. Normally, if the operating agreement does not say anything about how the profits of the LLC are set up, they're divided equally between all of the members regarding what sort of percentage ownership the members have. So if you don't say anything, everybody gets an equal amount. The 90% owner gets the same amount as the 10% owner. On the other hand, you can divide those up in the operating agreement. For example, I did an LLC not too long ago where there were two owners. One owner came in and bought an interest in the LLC, and majority interest, by the way, and the operating agreement said that he got 90% of the losses. The other owner got 10% of the losses. But the first owner got 10% of the income, and the second owner got 90% of the income. Why? Because the first owner had a whole lot other income besides this LLC where he could use the losses that were being thrown off to go against his other income. So there's a huge amount of flexibility in the profits. What are the disadvantages? Well, one major disadvantage is that the LLCs have been around such a short amount of time and the law is not very clear on them, and sometimes the courts get kind of weird on trying to determine what's good law for an LLC. Another disadvantage is that every state's law on LLCs, well, most every state's law on LLCs is pretty different. So just because you know what the law is in California is no sign you know what the law is in Wyoming or Nevada or Virginia or Ohio, for example, okay? Now, one of the things that we want to know about LLCs is that for purposes of jurisdiction, remember when we talked about federal jurisdiction, federal diversity jurisdiction? Diversity was citizens of different states with more than $75,000 at issue. Well, in a LLC, the courts generally rule that the LLC is a resident of every state in which there is an LLC member. So if there are LLC members in California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, then for diversity jurisdiction, those 4 states are where the LLC is a member of. Okay? So, just remember, diversity jurisdiction, it may play out in federal jurisdiction, federal diversity jurisdiction, and you've got to be careful if you're trying to sue in federal court. It used to be that we would go through all sorts of gyrations trying to figure out how to best do entities and protect our client. Nowadays, The LLC is generally the lawyer's business entity of choice because of its advantages and because of its flexibility. Example, I haven't done a limited partnership in forever. I just don't remember the last time I did a limited partnership, because nowadays all we're doing is LLCs, particularly for real estate investments. Okay, folks, that's it for the limited liability entities this go around. Next time we're going to do corporations, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Stay safe.